Guys, I just wanted to add my thoughts on this permanent underclass fear that's been spreading over YouTube and social media after Fable 5 got temporarily suspended. The thinking behind some of those fears is that the best models are getting locked up, people are going to get cut off, and if you're not super rich or well connected, you're going to be part of a permanent AI underclass. But I think that fear has been canceled. And the reason it's been canceled is because GLM 5.2 just came out. And it is an open source model at a fraction of the cost that's on par with Opus 4.8. Now, granted, it's not as good as Fable 5 or Mythos 5. However, by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why the scary story falls apart and what to do so even if it does happen, it doesn't impact you too much. To be fair, though, to some of those accounts expressing this fear, I have to admit they're partly justified in the fear. It is harder to get the best AI model right now, the latest and greatest, due to new rules and the safety checks. And yeah, the best model ever created was suspended by the US government. But where that train of thought goes a little bit too far is that you will be locked out of these AI capabilities and AI tools forever. And that second part has never been proven, because I'll explain why with GLM and open source, but even with other technologies, every time in history, somebody said that this technology would be locked up from the public. It didn't pan out that way. But with AI, we can already dispel these fears because, like I said, GLM 5.2 just came out. It is actually on par with Opus. So it's not as good as Fable 5, but it is one of the best models out right now, open source at a fraction of the cost. When it comes to real world coding, it performs only 4 points behind Opus 4.8, which was, until Fable 5 came out, the best coding model. And it came out not too long after Opus 4.8 came out. So the gap between a locked up frontier model and a model that you can download open source is this is a sign that it's closing. It's also cheaper, so now you won't have to be rich to get access to the latest AI tools. Opus costs $5 per million tokens. GLM is about a third of that at 1.4, and it's free to download. So it's almost 5 times cheaper to use GLM 5.2. And once you download an open source model, really nobody can take that away from you, because there's no band that can reach into your own computer or infrastructure or GPUs running the GLM 5.2 model. By the way, if you like this kind of content, AI news backed by evidence instead of panic, subscribe. That's what my channel is all about, giving you the latest AI news straight with minimal sensationalism. And it's not just the benchmarks that show that GLM 5.2 is on par with what was Anthropic's best model. Real builders all over social media have tried it. They put it head to head against Opus 4.8. And this post, for example, from an engineer who did that for a week, found that it is in fact on par and truly a frontier coding model on par with Opus 4.8. So builders who tested it side by side have concluded that these models are just as good, almost as good. So the gap is closing. Now it's very interesting to think about how these Chinese labs came up with GLM 5.2 and how they were able to catch up to what was the best model, the best frontier model. Locking up technology has a funny side effect. With technology, generally, whenever a technology is prohibited, people do eventually find a way to acquire that technological tool. Somebody builds a cheaper version that's almost as good, and sometimes they release a free version you can download and run at home. In other AI labs, by the way, the lab between GLM isn't the only lab working on creating open source models as capable as frontier models. There's also Meta's Llama, there's DeepSeek, there's Alibaba's Qwen, all of which are free and open source, and you can download today and run off your own GPUs. And this is what computer-related technology has always done. They do make it eventually into the hands of the general population. As an example from history, if you look at computers, they used to fill a room, then there was on every desk. Companies used to use their own servers. Now you rent them by the month. The special chips for AI were impossible to buy. Now you can rent one online in 5 minutes on a platform like Modal, for example. Even GPT-4, when it first came out, it was quite expensive. There was a wait list, there was a paywall. It was $60 per million tokens, so very expensive. Again, for comparison, Opus is currently $5 per million tokens. But now, just a few years later, GPT-4 level AI is free, and it didn't take too long for that to happen. In fact, the free open source models of today are far superior to GPT-4 from a couple of years ago. So it's been proven that every time something powerful gets locked up, it's only a matter of time before access spreads and price falls. Every single time. I can't really think of an example where that hasn't happened. Besides, you could argue nuclear weapons, but even then, as much as the US wanted to keep it to themselves, eventually other countries like North Korea were able to build them very cheaply. Same thing with satellites. Used to be a competitive advantage for the US and the Soviet Union, but other countries caught up. Having said this, one of the lessons from this episode is that you don't want to get attached to just one AI model. So if your whole workflow is limited to one AI tool, one login, one subscription, then yes, a ban or a shutdown could hurt you. But there's now open source models that constantly keep closing the gap to the latest frontier models that you can get for free. So when relying on something like Opus or Fable, or whatever the latest frontier model is, you want to make sure that you have your setup configured in a way where you could easily switch over to an open source model if you need to. And that's the defense against this permanent underclass fear. What I would suggest this week is try an open source model, pick one open model. GLM 5.2 is the obvious one. It is the best open source model for coding right now. And try it out, because then you'll know that you have a backup that works before you need it. Of course, some people are actually using GLM as a replacement to Opus 4.8 due to its cost, but either way, you have a reliable backup with these open source models. So again, you have to ask yourself, if this particular AI model got shut down, am I ready to switch to a different model? You should be. Unfortunately, with open source models like GLM 5.2 getting so good, you have a backup option. And so those scary video titles about permanent AI underclass, etc., you can ignore those. I think the permanent AI underclass has been canceled. And next time there's a frontier model that gets pulled off the shelf, you know what to do. Just go get an open source model that is almost as good. So once again, if you like this type of objective content around AI without too much sensationalism, subscribe to this channel. It'll help me continue making more of these videos. And thanks very much, and have a good day.